Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. We're going to be looking today at the drash from called Vayishlach, and he sent, Genesis chapter 32 through to Genesis chapter 36. Obadiah is the Haftarah, and Hebrews 11 is from the Parasha. So let's read directly here from this text. Yakov sent messengers ahead of him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, with these instructions. Here is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Yakov says, I have been living with Lavan and have stayed with him until now. I have cattle and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants, and I'm sending to tell you this news to my lord in order to win your favour within there. And then it says the messengers returned to Yakov, saying, we went to see your brother Esau, and he's coming to meet you with 400 men. It says Yakov became greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people, the flocks, the cattle, the camels with him into two groups, saying, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, at least the camp that is left will escape. Abba, we pray, help us understand the Torah Parasha today and live it out in our lives. B'Shem Yeshua. So we pick up the story that we had from last week with our father Yakov. He's returning back to the land that's promised to him, to his father Yitzhak, to his father Avram. But he's coming away from the wages disputes and the manipulation of his father-in-law Laban. And this parashah is all about how Yaakov wrestled with God and with humans. And he keeps persevering until victory. Our Chavarah group spoke a lot about this as we discussed the whole passage this last Wednesday about the perseverance of Yaakov that comes through. The parashah starts by showing Yaakov's concern of soon having to face his brother Esau. Now that's a valid concern because the last time he saw Esau was breathing threats of murder over the birthright dispute. We covered that last week, so I encourage you to look at that from last week. So Yakov now sends messengers with promises of gifts so that Yakov would find grace, find favor in Esau's eyes. But the messengers come back and they return with troubling news. They say, yes, we saw Esau, but he's coming also to meet you, and he's got 400 men with him. And there's a tension here in the story. Why is he coming out like this? The rabbi's saying, we came to Esau, to the one who hates you. And the tension is, were these 400 men armed? Certainly those who write the Targum a bit later puts it in there, because it calls them 400 warriors. So the rabbis point out the concept of being afraid and distressed. We see that in verse 8. He's afraid there's a midrash that says he's afraid because he was afraid he's going to be killed along with his family, but also distressed because he might have to do some killing himself to protect the family. So the rabbis point out Yaakov prepared for his defense against Esau in three different ways. In those three different ways, first of all, he prayed. As we should do in any crisis, we should pray. And he prays to God for protection and deliverance from the hand of Esau. And he reminds God of the promises that he's made through the Abrahamic covenant to Yakov. And again, the rabbis like to point out the repentant aspects of Yaakov's prayer, the spiritual reflection and worship that's within there. Secondly, he sent gifts. Was the gifts there as a bribe? Were they there to compensate for any loss that Esau may have felt with the whole birthright transaction? Was it there to show that Yakov is coming back, and as the birthright holder, he will provide for them, as one with the birthright holder should do for the family? The tension is left there for us to discuss. But thirdly, he also prepared. He set himself ready for war, divided into two groups, and the two groups are coming together. Esau with the 400 as well as Yakov with his family coming together. But then in the middle of their meeting comes this strange story of a smackdown wrestling match. On the way has this strange encounter with a man having a wrestling match, and that's Genesis 32 verses 24 through to 32. We don't know what time of the night this starts, but it continues until daybreak. The question is, who is this man that Yakov is up against? The rabbis say it's a spirit of Esau, the angel of Esau. Other rabbis say it's a heavenly being. Others say it's the divine being. But let's have a look at the list of things, what this one is able to do in this wrestling match. First of all, we find there he's able to change Yaakov's name, change it from Yakov to Israel. Only one who's greater than the person who's having their name changed can do this action. So it's one who's greater than one of the patriarchs, our father Yakov. Secondly, is able to give a name that embodies God's name. The L on the end is a reference to God, of Israel. Only a greater one can actually do this action. So also, he was able to withhold his own name. We see there in Judges chapter 13, verses 17 to 18, the angel of the Lord was able to withhold his name, saying it's so wonderful. An angel of the Lord is a code often in the Tanakh of an Old Testament appearance of Yeshua. He's able to bless Yakov. Again, it's always the greater blesses the lesser. So again, this one is greater than one of the patriarchs of Yakov. But here's a great telling verse here, verse 30. Yakov says there, I have seen God face to face, punim to punim, and yet my life is spared. The Targum actually says here, I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face. So many people, including Messianic Jews, say, again, this could only be another Old Testament appearance of Yeshua. The one thing we want to bring out of all this is the name change in the midst of this wrestling match. He changes from Yakov, and last week we discussed how Yakov doesn't mean supplanter. That's Esau's twist on the name. It actually means may God protect, the concept of a rear guard. And he changed from that name to Yisrael, which many translations has in there, Prince with God. But many also point out that the name is built around the verb of sirah. The word of sirah there means to fight, to struggle. And here we have there a Hebrew word that comes in such importance, only found 3 times in the Tanakh. Once here and twice in the book of Hosea, where it's in direct relationship to there. It says that Yaakov sirah, with God and with the angel of the Lord, probably direct reference to this fight that goes on here, and he overcame. The concept of the word Yisrael is the realm of actually God fights, or the ya in front of there, the yod there, may he struggle with God with a positive outcome of and win. So may he struggle with God and win. The concept of one who overcomes, the one who perseveres through to victory. Rabbi Hertz talks about this in his commentary, and he says, clearly it's a title of victory, a champion of God, conquering by strength from above. A very important thing. So it's not, as so many preach and complain and claim, and I've heard so many sermons about this over the years, saying it's changing Jacob's negative character into being now a prince with God, from a deceiver to being a prince with God. But it's actually not that. It's changing from a positive, may God protect, or the realm of a rear guard, to a greater positive, may he struggle and overcome with God, is the fullness of what the word Yisrael would mean. And that's why it says there in verse 29, because you have shown your strength. So why did he do this? Because you have shown, not will show, not changing his character to do something in the future, but based on what's been done in the past. You have shown your strength to both God and other humans, and you have overcome. In other words, the name change is a reward for who he is, not for who he's going to be. And the nation of Israel since then have struggled with both humanity and with God, and continues even into this day. We reflect on the words of Tevye from out of Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye says, I know we are your chosen people, but once in a while, can't you choose somebody else? That struggle that goes on all the time. Personally, our wrestling with other humans are also like Yakov's situation. The wrestling happens so often with family and with close friends. And the question comes in, how do we handle these close personal conflicts that typically hurt deeper than those conflicts that happen at a distance? We move on to the meeting of Yakov and Esau. But it's only after this counter, only after that encouraging name change, does Yakov meet Esau, and he overcomes. The tension is left in the story. We don't know if Esau has originally come in to harm him with the 400 men that comes within there. But we find some interesting things here in the text. First of all, in verse 3 of chapter 33, Yaakov's humility, he bows 7 times to Esau. Notice Esau did not bow back. So again, shows the heart between the two. It's an ancient way of greeting a high official, but it's also showing, I am as the covenant person, I am the one with the birthright, I am here to serve you. So he bows before his brother. And then we also may reflect on Yitzhak's blessing, where it says, may your mother's sons bow down to you. He had intended it for Esau, but Yaakov was the one who received it. So again, I've heard it preached so many times, Yakov is handing back his birthright. No, he's not doing that. He's just humbly acknowledging his brother as an official in the land, and I have come here as the birthright holder to serve you. I'm here to do things with you, not to take from you. Verse 4 tells us that Esau ran to Yakov, not to fight him, but now there's been a change in Esau's heart. Now he accepts Yakov as his brother again. He falls on his neck, kisses him, hugs him tightly. A wonderful phrase there, and they wept. They wept together. There's mutual repentance, mutual forgiveness, and mutual acceptance. And Yakov says these amazing words, I have seen your face as though I have seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me. What an amazing thing to say. This is the face of forgiveness. We look at the one who had intended us harm. Now there's been restoration. I can look at your face as if I'm looking at the face of Adonai. Amazing thing, and the result of prayer and of humbleness and willing to give to someone who they perceive harm from. God had turned Esau's hate into love, the spirit of forgiveness instead of the spirit of murder. And again, Yakov asked Esau to accept his gifts that is given to him as a mincha, as an offering. It's there in the Hebrew. Yakov responds in last week's parashah to the God's blessings of the Abrahamic covenant by tithing to God, but now he gives to his brother Esau, even though Esau had given threats of murder to him. Yakov buys land that's already promised to him, and promised to him by God, and he digs a well there. The well still exists. It's interesting that although the land was promised, Yakov still goes out and buys the land. He didn't wait passively for it to come about. Many times when God promises things, even in prophetic word, we have to get up and go do it and make it happen. Don't wait passively. Neither did Yakov. He was a covenant man, and he pursued the promises of God. I went back to the Bible college where I studied so many years ago. I went back there 15 years after I graduated, and all these people there had got these wonderful, grandiose prophecies that I never got. And I went back, and here they are still on campus, waiting for God to do a miraculous thing for them to go and fulfill the prophecy. And I said, well, get up off your butt, go get a job, book an air ticket, and go do what God called you to do. For some reason, they got upset with that. We've got to go out and we've got to make it happen. It's not sit back waiting passively. Neither did Yakov. So again, he makes another altar so he could continue worshipping Adonai there in Shechem. Then in chapter 35, Adonai calls Yakov to revisit the place of their first encounter, Bethel. And we said last week, by Jewish tradition, that is there on Mount Moriah where the temple was later built. But first, Yakov and his family had to rid themselves of the family idols that they had accumulated along there. Perhaps it's a reference to chapter 31, verse 34, the family icons that Rachel took from Laban to aid their inheritance claim. Sometimes we need to occasionally check our hearts and our possessions to make sure no idols have crept in. I remember a worship leader coming to me one time saying, I need to lay down my guitar because it's become an idol to me. They come to the place, They build, and again, Yakov builds another altar there to sacrifice and do worship. Without sacrifice, there can be no worship. Our worship comes out of sacrifice. There's a tension. What will Adonai's response be to Yakov in response to all of his treating with Laban and with the reunity with Esau and all the other things? Well, it's interesting. We find there that again Adonai appears and again blesses Yakov. There's acceptance, there's approval, and again ratifies the name change from Yakov to Yisrael. And he ratifies the priestly blessing to be fruitful and multiply, have a multitude of descendants. How many? You'll be a nation and a company of nations, and kings will come from you. Again, the blessing keeps flowing. And he ratifies the progression of the Abrahamic and Isaac and Yitzhak's covenant onto Yakov, onto Israel, and again ratifies the land for Israel and the many descendants within there. Israel's response is again to set up a pillar of remembrance, just like in the first time. And he responds now with offerings of drink and oil offerings. It again shows that covenant heart that our father Yakov, Yisrael, had. But trouble is after that, just when you think it can't get any better than this, God's blessed. He's ratified the covenant, reunited with Esau. He now owns land. The family's growing. And Rachel, his favorite wife there, is pregnant with number 2. Now 3 tragic events comes along and tragically just challenges everything for him. First of all, chapter 35, verse 16 to 20, Rachel dies giving birth to Benjamin. Devastation. How often we can feel on top of the world one moment and then devastation hits. Certainly this year has done this with COVID, and many have lost so much. Israel buries Rachel on the road to Bethlehem and builds another memorial pillar, and Rachel's tomb is still marked now with a small building there. Then secondly, in chapter 35, verse 22, the eldest son, Reuben, betrays Yakov by laying with Bilhah, his concubine. And in so doing, Reuben forfeits the birthright. Again, another birthright issue. Then thirdly, in chapter 35, verses 27 to 29, Yisrael finally meets up with his father Yitzhak. They'd likely met before, but this hasn't been recorded for us. But he meets there for the unfortunate death of Yitzhak. His father dies at 180 years of age. By the way, many years after his excuse to try to give the birthright secretly to Esau, saying, "I'm old, I'm dying." Again, referred to last week for that. But the good news is the brothers do unite again to bury their father. There's shalom. There is unity. Sadly, while Esau forgave Yakov, Israel, and lived in peace with him, his descendants of Amalek and Edom did not. And they continued the fight long after the forgiveness has taken place, which then brings us to the Haftarah of Obadiah, which Obadiah is a book, you can read it later, we don't have time to go through it today, speaks positively about Yakov, about Israel, but announces God's judgment on Edom for empowering the Babylonian destruction of Israel, and other times that Edom attacked Israel. Amalek and Edom did the sin of taking up somebody else's offense. The problem with taking up an offense that is not ours is we are unable to forgive the party that did the offense. And we're left in anger when there's reconciliation that happened between the original disputing parties. And we're then left fighting a fight that is not ours, that others have left long behind. That's what happened with Amalek. That's what happened with Edom. And they suffered the consequence where Edom was destroyed. The whole message here in this parashah comes down to the realm of forgiveness. We've got to understand forgiveness sets us free. How do we ask for forgiveness? How do we go about asking for forgiveness? And how do we respond when we do forgive others? What actions do we take to demonstrate that we have forgiven? Are we like Yakov, who's able to give to the one who's still, as far as he is aware, still breathing threats of murder against him, certainly coming against him with 400 warriors? How do we forgive? Do we still give to those and reach out to them? How do we keep responding to people as we knew them in the past, or are we able to give people room to grow and mature? How much are we willing to wrestle? How much are we willing to struggle? How much are we willing to strive with God to receive God's blessing and calling? I want to leave you with those questions and walk toward forgiveness, that we would live in peace with all those around us, as it says there in the Beit HaMashiach. So thank you. May you have a great week. Shavua Tov.